I never imagined that betrayal could be so vivid, so gut-wrenching, that it would feel like my heart was being ripped out of my chest while I was still breathing. But that's exactly what happened. It started with something small, almost insignificant. A discrepancy in our joint bank account. It was a lazy Saturday morning when I sat at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and scrolling through our finances. I wasn't even looking for anything specific, just a habit I'd developed to keep track of our expenses. We had been saving for a family vacation, and I liked to see our progress. But then I saw it. A withdrawal. A big one. $10,000. First, I thought it was a mistake. Maybe it was pending and would be corrected. But no, the transaction was cleared. My heart started beating faster. I checked the date. 3 days ago. My mind flipped through possibilities: a bank error, a hacked account, fraud. My hand shook as I refreshed the page, but the number didn't change. $10,000. Gone. Luke. I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. He was in the living room, half watching a football game. He glanced at me, distracted. Yeah, he said, his eyes still on the TV. Did you take $10,000 from our account? My voice was sharp, and it made him turn his head fully toward me. His face shifted for a fraction of a second, confusion, then something else I couldn't quite place. Oh, that, he said, brushing it off with a chuckle. Yeah, I forgot to mention it. It's an investment opportunity. My buddy Greg told me about it. It's supposed to pay off big in a couple of months. An investment? I repeated slowly. Without telling me? $10,000, Luke. That's not a small amount. He shrugged, eyes back on the TV. I was going to tell you. I just didn't want to stress you out with the details. It's a sure thing, babe. Trust me. Something about his tone, the casual way he dismissed my concerns, lit a fire in my chest. But I didn't want to start an argument. Not yet. I forced myself to nod and drop it, but my gut told me something was wrong. That night I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed, eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling. Luke snored softly next to me, his breathing steady, his face calm. But I was anything but calm. I reached for my phone on the nightstand and opened the banking app again. This time I looked at the full transaction details. The name of the recipient wasn't Greg or any kind of investment firm. No, it was something else entirely. Linden Realty Group. My pulse spiked. Realty Group? As in real estate? I sat up in bed, my heart thudding hard against my ribs. Why would Luke send money to a real estate company? Was he buying property? No, that didn't make sense. We already had a mortgage. My mind raced with 100 possibilities, each one worse than the last. I knew I wouldn't find peace until I got answers. The next day, I went to the office under the guise of work. But I wasn't working. Not in the way my boss thought, anyway. I looked up Linden Realty Group online, found their office address, and decided to pay them a visit. The receptionist at the front desk smiled brightly at me when I walked in. She had that overly cheery customer service grin that only people in sales have. Hi, welcome to Linden Realty Group. How can I help you today? I smiled back, the kind of smile you wear when you're hiding something. Hi. I'm looking to rent an apartment. I'm new in town and just getting familiar with the area. I glanced around the room, noting the modern decor, the large posters of luxurious apartments hanging on the walls. Do you have any current listings I could see? Of course, she chirped, turning to her computer. What kind of space are you looking for? 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom. 2 bedroom, I said, not even thinking. Something cozy but modern. I'd love to see some photos if you have them. She nodded, typing quickly. We actually just listed a few 2-bedroom units this week. Let me pull them up for you. She turned her monitor slightly so I could see. The first few pictures were generic staged apartments with spotless kitchens, minimal decor, and furniture that looked like it came straight out of a catalog. Then she clicked on a unit listed as newly renovated, quiet neighborhood. As soon as the first photo appeared, my breath caught in my throat. It was a bathroom shot. A modern bathroom with sleek gray tiles and a wide glass shower. But that's not what caught my attention. Hanging neatly on the wall were 2 towels. A dark blue one and a pale yellow one. My towels. No, I told myself, my brain struggling to make sense of it. No, that's just a coincidence. Lots of people have those colors. But the doubt was already there, a festering, sickening doubt. The next photo was of the bedroom. On the nightstand I saw it, the exact same lamp we had in our guest room. The same one I had picked out from a home decor store 2 years ago. My hands felt numb. My heart pounded so loud I could hear it in my ears. "Can I see more of this unit?" I asked, somehow managing to keep my voice even. "Of course," she said, clicking to the next photo. The living room. I saw the throw blanket. It had the same fringe, the same pattern I remembered picking out with Luke. This wasn't just some random apartment. This was his apartment. "Is this one currently occupied?" I asked, my voice sounding strange in my ears. The receptionist glanced at the screen, then shook her head. "Not at the moment. But I believe it was recently vacated. We just finished staging it." "Vacated?" I echoed, gripping the edge of the counter. "Do you have a record of the previous tenant? I'd like to know if it was a short-term rental or—" "Oh, I'm not sure I can give out that information," she said, her smile faltering slightly. "But I can check for you." She clicked around a bit more, her eyes scanning the screen. Looks like the previous tenant had a 6-month lease. It ended 2 weeks ago. 2 weeks ago. Luke had been working late almost every night for the past 6 months. I felt my world tilt. Everything made sense now in the worst possible way. The distance between us. The missed calls. The sudden business trips. This apartment wasn't some random rental. It was his hideaway. A secret space where he could live another life. "Do you mind if I get the address for this unit?" I asked, struggling to sound casual. "I'd love to check out the area in person." She jotted it down on a business card and handed it to me. I didn't even say goodbye. I walked out in a daze, heart racing, hands trembling. I drove straight to the address. It wasn't far. A small, quiet building with a tidy lawn. My fingers tightened on the steering wheel as I stared at it from the street. I felt like a ghost, like I was watching someone else's life unfold from the outside. I didn't go inside. I didn't need to. I had seen enough. That night I sat at the kitchen table waiting for Luke to come home. My wedding ring felt heavy on my finger, like it was suddenly made of lead. When I heard his car pull into the driveway, I didn't move. He walked in, tossing his keys on the counter, pausing when he saw me sitting there in the dark. "Hey," he said slowly, eyes narrowing. "Why are you sitting in the dark?" I looked up at him and I swear I felt something inside me break. "How's your second apartment, Luke?" I asked quietly, my voice razor sharp. His face went still. Not confused. Not surprised. Just still. He knew. And now so did I. Luke froze, his hand still on the zipper of his jacket. His eyes darted toward mine, scanning my face as if searching for a sign of how much I knew. His silence told me everything. It wasn't shock. It wasn't confusion. It was calculation. He was trying to figure out how to play this. "Don't stand there like an idiot," I said, my voice cutting through the air like a blade. "Sit down, Luke. You owe me that much." He hesitated, his fingers twitching at his sides. I could see the gears turning in his head, probably weighing whether to lie, deny, or deflect. But he knew I'd seen too much. He slowly moved toward the chair opposite me and sat down, his body tense like a coiled spring. "Look, before you say anything," he began, raising his hands in a half-hearted gesture of surrender. "I can explain." "Can you?" I asked, leaning forward on the table, my eyes locked on his. "Because I'm dying to hear how you explain having a second apartment with our towels and our throw blankets in it. Please, Luke, enlighten me." His mouth opened then shut. He glanced down at his hands, rubbing his thumb against his palm. His classic tell. He only did that when he was nervous or cornered. "It's not what you think," he muttered, still not meeting my eyes. "Don't you dare insult my intelligence," I snapped, my voice cracking with the weight of everything I'd held in all day. "I went to Linden Realty, Luke. I saw the pictures. I saw our things. Our towels, our lamp, our blanket. What did you do? Raid our linen closet before you set up your love nest." "Stop," he said sharply, his eyes finally snapping up to meet mine. For a moment I saw something flash across his face. Anger, defensiveness, shame? I wasn't sure. But it disappeared just as quickly as it came. "Don't tell me to stop," I hissed, my chest rising and falling with shallow, rapid breaths. "You think I don't see it now? All those late nights working overtime. All those business trips you suddenly had to take. 6 months, Luke. 6 months of you sneaking around behind my back while I stayed home like a fool, thinking you were just tired, thinking you needed space, thinking I needed to be more patient with you. You made me doubt myself. My voice cracked and I clenched my fists to keep from breaking down into sobs. But it was never me, was it? It was never about me. His face hardened, his jaw tightening as he leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. You don't know everything, he said quietly, his tone low and controlled, like he was trying to calm a wild animal. You're making this into something it's not. I let out a hollow laugh, shaking my head in disbelief. Don't you dare gaslight me, Luke. I've seen enough to know exactly what this is. I leaned forward, matching his posture, my eyes never leaving his. So here's your chance. One chance. Who is she? He blinked, and for the briefest second I thought he might actually come clean. His shoulders dropped a fraction, and I saw his throat bob as he swallowed hard. But then his face shifted. His eyes hardened. Nobody, he said firmly, sitting up straighter. There's no she, okay? I got that apartment for myself. Just space, you know? A place to clear my head. Get away from everything for a while. He rubbed the back of his neck, his eyes shifting away from mine. I didn't know how to tell you, so I didn't. I stared at him like he'd just grown a second head. Space. I repeated, the word tasting bitter in my mouth. Space from what, Luke? From me? From our home. My voice rose with each word. You had an entire house, a family, a wife, and you needed space? So you blew 10 grand of our savings on a hideout and filled it with our things like some sick replica of our home. I shook my head slowly, feeling the tears finally burn at the corners of my eyes. If that's true, Luke, then you're even more pathetic than I thought. He flinched at that, his eyes narrowing. Don't act like you're perfect, Rachel, he shot back, his tone sharp as broken glass. You think I don't see it? The way you nitpick every little thing I do? The way you hover over me, questioning every decision I make? You never let me breathe. I felt a rush of heat spread up my neck, my heart thudding like a drum. Oh, so this is my fault now? I barked, pointing a finger at him. Poor Luke. Poor suffocated Luke, who had no choice but to rent a secret apartment behind his wife's back. That's the story you're going with. Yeah, maybe it is, he snapped, his eyes wild with frustration. Because you don't see yourself, Rachel. You think you're this perfect, patient wife, but you're not. You're controlling. Critical. Every day it's Luke, why didn't you do this, or Luke, why didn't you think of that? I just needed one place, where I didn't have to feel like a failure all the time. The words hit me like a slap to the face. I felt my breath leave me in a rush. For a moment I sat there in stunned silence like I'd just been punched in the gut. But then slowly the anger started to build again. You're unbelievable, I said, my voice deadly quiet. You want to play the victim? You want to tell me that I pushed you into this? No, Luke. You don't get to rewrite the story to make yourself the hero. You didn't rent that apartment to breathe. You rented it to escape responsibility. To escape me. And maybe. I took a slow, deliberate breath, locking eyes with him. Maybe to have somewhere to take her. His eyes twitched. Just a flicker. But I saw it. I leaned back in my chair, my heart thudding hard, slow and steady now. I felt cold, the kind of cold that seeps into your bones and doesn't go away. That's it, isn't it? I whispered. There is someone else. He shook his head quickly, too quickly. You're paranoid, Rachel. There's no one else. I told you it was for me. You're lying, I said, my voice eerily calm. I know it. And you know it. I can see it on your face. Believe what you want, he muttered, standing up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. You've already decided I'm guilty, so why should I waste my breath? I stood too, not letting him tower over me. Because I deserve the truth, Luke. After everything I've done for you, I deserve at least that much. His eyes flicked to mine, and for a moment I thought I saw regret there. Real regret. But it was gone in an instant. I told you the truth, he said coldly, grabbing his keys from the counter. If you don't believe it, that's on you. He turned and walked toward the front door. His footsteps hard and fast. Don't come back, I said, my voice steady and clear. He paused at the door, his hand on the doorknob. You don't mean that, he said softly without turning around. I do, I said firmly, my nails digging into my palms. Because I deserve better than this. Better than you. He didn't move for a second. Then slowly, he pulled the door open and stepped out into the night, letting it swing shut behind him. The sound echoed through the house, final and sharp as a gunshot. I stood there for a long time, listening to the silence, feeling it settle over me like a weight. And for the first time in a long time I didn't feel fear. I felt free. Hurt, yes. Shattered, absolutely. But free. Because I knew one thing for certain. I would never again doubt myself. The silence in the house was deafening. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, my mind struggling to process everything that had just happened. My breathing was shallow, my chest tight with the weight of it all. It felt like I had been cracked open, every raw nerve exposed to the cold air of reality. For months I had felt something shifting between us, like a slow, invisible wedge being driven deeper and deeper. I told myself it was work stress, or maybe we were just going through one of those rough patches every couple faces. But now I knew better. I knew I had been living in a story of my own making, believing in a version of Luke that didn't exist anymore. My feet felt heavy as I moved toward the kitchen. Each step felt deliberate, like I had to remind myself how to walk. I pulled out a chair and sat, resting my elbows on the table and burying my face in my hands. My skin was hot, but my fingertips were cold. My body didn't know how to process what had just happened. Part of me felt numb, hollowed out. Another part felt like a volcano on the verge of erupting. I sat like that for what felt like hours. Not hours. Just silence. The kind of silence that eats at you, that lets every dark thought echo louder and louder in your mind. I stared at the wooden grain of the table, tracing the swirling patterns with my eyes, not really seeing them. Eventually I reached for my phone. My thumb hovered over his name in my contacts list, but I didn't call. What would be the point? I knew he wouldn't answer, and even if he did, what more was there to say? He had made his choice. No choices. Plural. Each lie, each secret trip to that apartment, each moment he looked me in the eyes and told me he loved me. All of those were choices. I opened the banking app again, scrolling through every transaction from the past 6 months. My heart pounded as I searched for any pattern, any clue I had missed. How had I not seen it before? There it was. Smaller withdrawals I brushed off as random expenses. A couple hundred here. 500 there. Each one listed under nondescript codes or payment processors that didn't seem unusual at the time. But now I knew. He'd been funneling money toward his secret life bit by bit, slowly, methodically. I clenched my jaw so hard it hurt. How long had he been planning this? How long had I been the fool, smiling at him every night, cooking him dinner, waiting for him to come home from late meetings? I thought about all the nights I'd stayed up, worried he'd been in an accident, wondering if I should call him again just to hear his voice. And all that time he was probably there, in that apartment, wrapped up in a world I wasn't part of. The kitchen felt too small all of a sudden. The walls seemed to press in on me. I stood abruptly, pushing the chair back so hard it almost tipped over. My hands were trembling now, and I couldn't tell if it was from anger or exhaustion. I grabbed my keys from the hook by the door. I didn't know where I was going, but I knew I couldn't stay here. The night air was sharp and cold as I stepped outside. My breath came out in clouds of mist, and I sucked in deep gulps of it, letting the cold sting my lungs. It was grounding. It reminded me that I was real, that this pain was real. I climbed into my car and sat there for a moment, gripping the steering wheel with both hands. I stared straight ahead, feeling that quiet rage settle in my chest, heavy and immovable like a stone. I knew where I was going. Linden Realty wasn't far. I'd been there earlier that day, and the address of the apartment was still scribbled on the business card in my coat pocket. I didn't even think twice. I turned the key in the ignition, and the engine hummed to life. My fingers tapped against the steering wheel as I pulled out of the driveway, my mind sharp and clear now, my body fueled by adrenaline and cold fury. The drive felt shorter this time, probably because I wasn't second-guessing myself. My foot pressed a little harder on the gas than usual, the streetlights blurring past. When I finally pulled up to the apartment building, I parked a few spaces away, out of view from the front entrance. I sat there for a minute watching, waiting. I didn't know for what, but I needed to see it. The building was quiet. No sign of Luke's car. No sign of anyone, really. It was just a plain, ordinary building on a quiet street. Nothing about it looked suspicious. But I knew better now. I'd seen the photos. I knew what was inside. My hand hovered over the door handle, and for a moment doubt crept in. What was I doing? Was I really going to confront him here? Break into his secret world just to catch him red-handed? My breath came fast and shallow. I could still turn back. I could go home, sleep on it, figure out a plan. No. I'd spent too much time ignoring the signs, convincing myself everything was fine. Not this time. Not anymore. I got out of the car, closing the door softly behind me. My sneakers crunched against the pavement as I made my way toward the entrance. There was a keypad for entry, and for a second I felt stupid. Of course I didn't have a code. I didn't belong here. But then I noticed a couple walking toward the door from the other direction. Young, mid-20s maybe, laughing softly to each other as they approached. I waited until they were close, then stepped forward like I belonged there. I smiled politely at them, hands stuffed in my coat pockets, and they smiled back, holding the door open for me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought they might hear it, but I nodded a simple, thanks, and walked in like I'd done it 100 times before. The hallway smelled like fresh paint and cleaning products. My sneakers squeaked softly on the floor. I walked slowly, glancing at the numbers on the doors as I passed. 101, 102, 103. Each step felt heavier than the last. I reached the end of the hall and stood in front of it. This was it. I stared at the door, my breath shallow and quick. My hands were cold even in my coat pockets, but I didn't move. I listened. It was silent on the other side.
No TV sounds.
No music. Nothing. My heart was beating so loud in my chest that I wondered if it was echoing in the hallway. I raised my hand about to knock. But then I stopped. My fingers hovered inches from the door. What am I even hoping to find? I lowered my hand slowly. My jaw tightened and I felt that same cold, steady rage take over. I wasn't here to beg for answers. I wasn't here to catch him in the act. I was here for one thing: clarity. The kind of clarity you only get when you see the truth with your own eyes. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. I scrolled to Luke's name, then pressed call. I pressed my ear to the door as the phone rang once, twice, 3 times. Then I heard it. His ringtone. Muffled, faint, but clear as day. It was coming from inside. My stomach dropped like I'd been yanked down a flight of stairs. My breath caught in my throat, and for a second I felt like I might collapse right there in the hallway. But I didn't. I stood there, frozen, listening as it rang and rang until it went to voicemail. Tears burned at the back of my eyes, but I refused to let them fall. I ended the call, gripped my phone so hard I thought I might break it, and swallowed down every scream building in my chest. He was in there. He was in there, and he hadn't even bothered to turn off his phone. I didn't knock. I didn't bang on the door. I just stood there, breathing slowly, letting every ounce of pain, betrayal, and rage burn into something harder, something colder. I took one last look at the door, the final piece of proof I'd needed. Then I turned and walked away, my footsteps loud and steady, never looking back. I didn't remember the drive home. I must have driven, but everything about it was a blur. The streetlights, the hum of the engine, the red glow of brake lights in front of me, it all passed in a fog. My fingers gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, but I didn't loosen my grip. It felt like the only thing keeping me from falling apart. By the time I pulled into the driveway, my whole body felt numb. The house was dark except for the faint glow from the porch light. The same house where I'd cooked him dinner, folded his laundry, stayed up late waiting for him. The house where we'd spent Christmas mornings unwrapping gifts, where we'd talked about starting a family, when the time was right. I sat in the car for a long time, staring at it like it was some stranger's home. It didn't feel like mine anymore. It didn't feel like ours. It felt like something had been stolen from me, and now all that was left was a hollow shell. I finally got out, my legs stiff from sitting too long. The cold night air hit me like a slap, but I welcomed it. It reminded me that I was still here, still breathing, still standing. I walked up the steps slowly, my feet feeling heavier with each step. I unlocked the door and stepped inside. The familiar scent of home hit me. That faint mix of pine cleaner and vanilla candles I always burned in the evenings. My eyes scanned the living room, taking in every little detail. The blanket folded over the arm of the couch. The mug I'd left on the coffee table that morning. Our framed wedding photo on the wall. I stood there for a moment just staring at that photo. It had been taken on the beach at sunset. The light had hit us just right, turning everything golden soft. I remembered thinking, this is it. This is the man I'm going to grow old with. I'd never felt so sure about anything in my life. Now I couldn't even look at it. I grabbed the frame off the wall and turned it face down on the table. It made a soft thud, but it might as well have been a gunshot. I stared at it for a second longer, my chest rising and falling with slow, deliberate breaths. I could feel it building again, that sharp electric surge of anger under my skin. I moved through the house like a ghost, walking from room to room, touching things, taking it all in like it was the last time I'd ever see it. Our bedroom was next. The bed was still unmade, the covers pulled back on his side where he'd slept last night. His pillow still had the faintest impression of his head. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at it like it was a crime scene. I thought about all the nights I'd laid next to him, feeling that distance grow wider and wider. I blamed myself. He's stressed from work, I told myself. He's just tired. Be patient. Be supportive. Every time I'd felt that little prickle of doubt, I'd smothered it, convinced myself I was being paranoid. Don't be that kind of wife, I'd thought. Don't be needy. Don't be insecure. God, I hated myself for that now. I stood up and walked to the closet. His clothes were all there. His button-downs, his jeans, his old college sweatshirt that I used to steal when it got too cold. My fingers brushed over the fabric, and I felt a sharp sting behind my eyes. I could still smell him on some of them. It hurt more than I expected. I grabbed one of the hangers, pulled down a shirt, and stared at it in my hands. And then without thinking I ripped it. The fabric didn't tear right away, so I gritted my teeth, dug my nails in and pulled harder. It finally gave way with a loud, satisfying rip. I didn't stop. I grabbed another shirt, and another, yanking them off their hangers, tearing them apart with both hands. My breath came in sharp, ragged bursts, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might explode. Button-downs, t-shirts, even his stupid ratty gym clothes. All of it ended up in a shredded pile at my feet. I didn't stop until I was gasping for air. Sweat on my forehead, my fingers raw and aching. I stood there, surrounded by the wreckage of his wardrobe, my chest heaving like I'd run a marathon. It wasn't enough. It wasn't even close to enough. The tears finally came then, hot and fast, blurring my vision. I pressed my hands to my face and let out a sound I didn't even recognize. It was half a sob, half a scream, like something had been pulled out of me by force. My knees buckled and I sat on the floor, my back against the closet door, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I don't know how long I sat there, just letting it all out. My mind felt like a broken record, replaying every moment, every sign I'd ignored, every lie he'd told. I hated him. I hated her, whoever she was. But most of all, I hated myself for being blind to it for so long. Eventually, the tears stopped. My breathing slowed. My chest still ached, but it wasn't sharp anymore. It was dull now, a heavy weight pressing down on me. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater and leaned my head back against the door, staring up at the ceiling. I knew what I had to do. It wasn't some big, dramatic realization. It was quiet, simple, a kind of clarity I hadn't had in months. I wasn't going to wait for him to come crawling back with his excuses. I wasn't going to let him tell me, it's not what it looks like, or it was just a mistake. No, I was done being the woman who waits for explanations. I was going to be the woman who walks away. I pushed myself up off the floor, my legs unsteady but stronger than they'd been earlier. I moved with purpose now. I went to the bathroom and grabbed a suitcase from under the sink, the one I usually saved for vacations. I wheeled it into the bedroom and opened it on the bed. One by one I started packing. Not his things. My things. My clothes, my jewelry, my books. I didn't take everything, just what I needed. I wasn't staying here, not in this house, not with these memories clawing at me like ghosts. This wasn't my home anymore. I moved from room to room, gathering everything that mattered, my mind calm and clear now. Every item I packed felt like a step forward. My photo albums. My laptop. The necklace my mom had given me on my wedding day. The one I'd taken off last year because it reminded me too much of us. I put it back on. When the suitcase was full, I zipped it up and dragged it to the front door. I glanced around one last time. I half expected him to walk in, his face full of surprise, his voice full of empty apologies. But he wasn't here. He was still at that apartment living his other life. I opened the door and stepped outside. The cold air hit me again, but this time it didn't sting as much. I dragged the suitcase down the steps, letting it bump against each one. I didn't care if it got scratched. I didn't care about anything but getting away. I loaded the suitcase into the trunk of my car, my breath fogging in the cold air. I glanced up at the house, and for a moment I felt a pang of sadness. This was supposed to be our home. But homes aren't made of wood and nails. They're made of trust, love, and loyalty, all of which had crumbled to dust tonight. I climbed into the driver's seat, gripping the wheel tightly. The road stretched out in front of me, dark and endless, but I wasn't afraid of it. For once I wasn't afraid at all. I didn't know where I was going. A friend's house maybe. A hotel. It didn't matter. What mattered was that I was going. I was leaving. As I pulled out of the driveway, I didn't look back. I didn't need to. The life I'd built with him was already behind me, and there was nothing left to see. I drove with the windows down, letting the cold air whip against my face. It felt like a cleanse, like I was finally breathing fresh air after being trapped for too long. My fingers gripped the wheel steady and firm. I wasn't broken. Not anymore. I was free. I didn't stop driving until the sky began to lighten with the first traces of dawn. The horizon shifted from pitch black to a deep bruised purple, then to that pale, foggy blue that comes just before the sun breaks through. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, but I didn't care. Every mile I put between me and that house felt like a chain being cut loose. The farther I went, the lighter I felt. The world outside the car window was still and quiet. Empty streets, closed gas stations, dark storefronts with their metal shutters pulled down tight. Occasionally, a truck would rumble past, its headlights briefly flashing across my face before fading into the distance. I didn't know where I was going, and for the first time that didn't scare me. I had spent so much of my life planning, calculating, trying to control everything. I always thought if I just did things right, if I just tried harder, everything would work out. But look where that got me. I spotted a sign for a 24-hour diner and pulled into the parking lot, my tires crunching softly over the gravel. The fluorescent open sign buzzed faintly in the window, casting a pale red glow onto the pavement. There were only 2 other cars in the lot, both of them old beaters with rust creeping up their sides. I sat in the car for a minute, hands still gripping the steering wheel. I could see my reflection in the rearview mirror. Messy hair, tear-streaked face, eyes rimmed red. I looked like I'd been through hell, and honestly I had. But there was something else in my face now, something I hadn't seen in a long time. Resolve. I didn't recognize it at first, but it was there. Underneath all the hurt, the anger, the exhaustion, there it was. I got out of the car, shoving my hands into my coat pockets to block out the early morning chill. The air smelled like wet concrete and diesel fuel. My breath came out in soft clouds, disappearing almost as soon as they formed. The little bell above the diner door jingled as I stepped inside. Warm air rushed at me, carrying the scent of bacon, coffee, and syrup. It should have been comforting, but my stomach twisted with nerves. I scanned the place. Red vinyl booths with cracked seats, a counter lined with stools that had probably been here since the 80s. 2 older men sat at the counter, hunched over mugs of coffee, talking quietly to each other. Neither of them glanced at me. I walked to a booth in the back corner, away from the window, and slid into the seat. The vinyl was cold at first but warmed quickly under my legs. My eyes wandered over the old jukebox by the wall, its song list filled with classics I hadn't thought about in years. The waitress approached, a woman in her 50s, her name tag reading Gloria. She had kind eyes and a tired smile, the kind of look people get when they've seen everything and nothing surprises them anymore. "Coffee?" she asked, pulling a notepad from her apron pocket. "Yes, please," I said, rubbing my hands together for warmth. "And pancakes." "Just pancakes." She nodded, jotted it down, and walked away without another word. No small talk. No questions. For that I was grateful. I leaned back in the booth, my head resting against the back of the seat, eyes closed. The hum of the overhead lights mixed with the clatter of plates from the kitchen. For the first time all night I felt like I could breathe. Not well. Not fully. But enough. My phone buzzed in my pocket, and every muscle in my body went tight. I sat up, heart pounding in my chest. Don't look at it, I told myself. Don't look. But of course I did. It was a text from Luke. Where are you? Call me. I stared at it, my mind blank.
No epalegi. No panique.
Just those words, like I'd misplaced my phone and he was doing me a favor by telling me to come find it. My thumb hovered over the screen, every part of me wanting to type something cutting, something that would burn. Where am I? I wanted to write. Anywhere but with you. But I didn't. Instead, I deleted the text. Then I blocked his number. Felt small and stupid, but it also felt like a win. One tiny step in a long line of steps I was going to have to take. But at least it was something. I shoved the phone back into my pocket and sat up straighter. I wasn't going to let him follow me into this place, into this moment of peace I had carved out for myself. Gloria returned with the coffee, setting the steaming mug in front of me along with a small container of creamers and sugar packets. I thanked her quietly, watching the swirl of steam rise from the cup. I added a splash of creamer and stirred it slowly, the spoon tapping against the ceramic rim. The warmth seeped into my fingers, and I wrapped both hands around it, letting the heat soak in. For a while I didn't think about anything. Not Luke. Not the apartment. Not the life I was walking away from. I just sat there sipping my coffee, letting the world outside the diner fade into background noise. But eventually thoughts crept in. They always do. What now, Rachel? I had no plan. No next move. I could call my sister, but that would mean telling her everything. I could check into a hotel, but how long would I stay? How long could I avoid the questions, the awkward conversations, the looks of pity from people who'd never understand? I took another sip of coffee and stared down at the table. My hands had stopped shaking. That was something. I didn't know where I was going or what I was going to do. But I knew one thing. I wasn't going back. Not to him. Not to that house. Not to the version of myself who stayed quiet, ignored the signs, and blamed herself for everything. Gloria returned with my pancakes, setting the plate in front of me with a nod. Need anything else, hon? She asked, her voice kind but distant. No, I said, glancing up at her. This is perfect. She smiled at that, a small, knowing smile like she'd heard those words before from women like me. Women sitting alone at a booth at 6 a.m., eyes red but determined, slowly putting themselves back together, one breath, one bite, one small decision at a time. I picked up the fork and cut into the pancakes, letting the butter melt into the warm stack. It tasted sweeter than I remembered, like something I'd been craving without even knowing it. I took another bite and another. I didn't stop. I didn't stop eating. I didn't stop breathing. I didn't stop moving forward. By the time I'd finished the last bite, I felt something shift inside me. Small but real. It wasn't strength exactly, I wasn't there yet. But it was something close to it. I left cash on the table, more than the bill required. Gloria caught my eye from behind the counter, gave me another nod, and I nodded back. No words exchanged, but she knew. I think she knew. When I stepped outside, the sun was finally up. Pale gold light spilled across the street, soft and warm. It wasn't much, but it was enough. I walked to my car, opened the door, and sat behind the wheel. For the first time I knew where I was going. Not back. Never back. But forward. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have all the answers. But I had myself. And for now that was enough. I sat in the car for a while, letting the sunlight filter through the windshield, warming my face. It was soft, gentle, the kind of warmth that sneaks up on you slowly, not like the sharp cold of the night before. I tilted my head back against the headrest and closed my eyes, just letting myself feel it. No thoughts, no plans, just warmth. But the peace didn't last long. It never does. The moment you think you're okay, your mind decides to remind you of everything you're trying to forget. Images of Luke's face flashed behind my eyelids, the way his eyes had gone cold when I confronted him, the sharp edge of his voice when he said, "You've already decided I'm guilty, so why should I waste my breath?" I squeezed my eyes tighter like I could block him out if I just tried hard enough. But I knew that wasn't how it worked. You can't just unfeel betrayal. It settles into your bones, quiet but constant, like a dull ache that never really goes away. I opened my eyes and blinked up at the sky. It was that soft, washed-out blue that only comes after a long, sleepless night. My phone buzzed again, and for a second I panicked. I'd forgotten I'd blocked Luke's number so it couldn't be him. But that didn't stop my heart from leaping into my throat. I pulled the phone out and saw my sister's name on the screen, Emma. I almost didn't answer. I knew the moment I picked up, everything would spill out. Emma had a way of pulling the truth out of me, no matter how tightly I tried to hold it in. But I was tired. Tired of being strong, tired of pretending I had it all together. So I swiped to answer. "Hey," I said, my voice rougher than I expected. "Rachel." Her voice was bright, but there was a hint of concern under it. "You okay? You sound off." I hesitated, gripping the steering wheel with one hand. "Yeah," I said, forcing a short laugh. "Rough night, that's all." There was a pause, just a second too long. She knew me too well. "Want to tell me about it?" she asked gently, no push, no pressure. Just there. And for some reason that broke me. My throat tightened and I felt that hot prickling sensation behind my eyes. I sucked in a breath, trying to hold it back. But it came anyway. The tears. They spilled over hot and fast, blurring my vision. I pressed the heel of my hand against my eyes, trying to stop them, but it was too late. "Rachel." Emma's voice was sharper now, more alert. "What happened? Talk to me." I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. My chest felt too tight, my breath coming out in short, shaky gasps. I could hear myself trying to speak, but no words came out at first. Just the sound of me trying not to cry too loud in a diner parking lot at 7 a.m. "Hey, it's okay," she said softly. "I'm right here. Take your time." I gripped the phone tighter, my knuckles white. Finally, I managed to get the words out. He has another apartment, Em." My voice cracked on the last word, and I felt my face crumple as more tears came. "Our towels are things in her apartment." The line went so quiet I thought we'd lost connection. But then she spoke and her voice was so sharp it could cut glass. "Are you serious?" she said slowly, like she was afraid of the answer. I nodded, swallowing back the sob that threatened to escape. "I saw it, Emma. I saw it with my own eyes. I went to the agency, pretended to be a buyer, and they showed me pictures of the place. Our towels were hanging on the wall. My yellow towel, the one Mom gave me for Christmas last year." I wiped my face with my sleeve, my breath hitching with every word. "I don't know how long it's been going on, but I know I'm done. I'm done, Em." "Rachel." Her voice was softer now, but no less intense. "Where are you? Are you safe?" "Yeah," I said, my voice still shaky. "I'm at some diner a few towns over. I didn't know where else to go." "Okay," she said, her voice firm now, no room for argument. "Stay there. I'm coming to you. I don't care how far it is. I'm coming to you." "No," I said quickly, shaking my head.
Ha infine, I swear.
I needed to tell someone. "And I'm someone," she shot back. "I'm your sister. You think I'm going to sit at home while you're sitting in some diner alone crying over that man? No, ma'am. Text me the address. I'll be there." I wanted to argue, but I didn't have the energy. Part of me didn't want to be alone. Not anymore. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." "Good," she said, her voice strong and steady. "Get some more coffee. Order something sweet. I'll be there before you know it." I hung up, letting the phone drop into my lap. My eyes still burned, but I felt lighter somehow. Just knowing someone was coming for me. Someone who wouldn't lie to me, wouldn't leave me questioning my own reality. I picked up my phone again and sent her the address. When I looked up, the world outside the diner felt a little different. Brighter, maybe. More real. People were starting their mornings. I saw a woman in running gear jog past on the sidewalk, her ponytail swaying with every step. A man in a business suit sipped his coffee as he walked briskly toward the bus stop. Life moves on, I thought. Even when your world stops, life keeps moving. I went back inside, the little bell above the door jingling again. Gloria spotted me and raised an eyebrow. "Back for round 2? She asked with a small smile. "Yeah," I said, my voice steadier now. "Coffee. And maybe a slice of pie if you've got it." She grinned like she'd been waiting for me to say that. "Apple or cherry?" "Cherry," I said, sliding back into my booth. "Definitely cherry." She winked and disappeared into the kitchen. I sat back in the booth, resting my head against the cushion, letting my body relax for the first time in what felt like days. I glanced out the window at the cars passing by, the world waking up around me. I thought about Luke again, but this time it didn't hurt as much. I thought about that apartment, the towels, the lamp, the blankets. I thought about his face when I asked him, "How's your second apartment, Luke?" That flicker of recognition. The moment he realized it was over. And it was over. It really truly was. I didn't know what came next for me. I didn't have a plan. But for once that didn't feel like a bad thing. Plans were fragile, breakable things. I'd spent so much of my life making them, only to watch them fall apart in my hands. No more plans. Just choices. Choice by choice, step by step, I would move forward. The bell on the diner door jingled and I glanced up. It wasn't Emma, not yet, but it didn't matter. She was coming. I wasn't alone. Gloria slid a plate in front of me, the cherry pie still warm, the crust golden and flaky. She set down a fresh cup of coffee, too, and gave me that same knowing smile she'd given me earlier. "On the house," she said, tapping the edge of the plate. I smiled for the first time in what felt like forever. Not a forced smile. Not a polite one. A real one. "Thanks, Gloria," I said, picking up my fork. She nodded, already walking away. "Take care of yourself, hon." I watched her walk back behind the counter, her steps slow but sure. Then I took a bite of the pie. It was sweet, sharp, a little messy. It tasted like something I didn't know I'd been craving. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but right now I didn't care. For the first time in a long time, I was done waiting for things to get better. I was going to make them better. One choice, one bite, one breath at a time. I sat there for a long time, longer than I probably should have. The warmth of the cherry pie spread through me like a slow, steady pulse. Bite after bite, it felt like I was rebuilding something inside myself, piece by piece. The sweetness on my tongue was sharp but comforting, like I could taste the promise of something better. Each sip of coffee brought me back to the present, grounding me in the here and now. No more looking back. No more replaying every lie, every excuse, every late night he'd worked overtime. My phone sat on the table next to the plate, face down, silent. For once I didn't feel the urge to check it. I wasn't waiting for him to call. I wasn't hoping for an apology. I knew him well enough to know that if he did call, it wouldn't be to apologize. It would be to explain, to defend, to twist the story until somehow I was the villain for leaving. And I wasn't interested in that conversation. Not anymore. The bell above the diner door jingled again, and I glanced up, half expecting it to be Emma. But it wasn't. It was a man in his 30s wearing a hoodie and jeans, his face unshaven and his eyes half closed like he hadn't slept in days. He rubbed his hands together as he walked to the counter, ordered a coffee to go, and leaned on the counter while he waited. I watched him for a second, not because he was interesting but because I was noticing everything right now. Little details. How people move. How tired they look when they think no one's watching. It struck me then how many people might be walking around carrying things like I was. Heartbreak, betrayal, anger, grief. We all walk around looking normal on the outside while everything inside us is falling apart. The man at the counter didn't glance at me, didn't notice me at all, and I realized how invisible I probably looked right now. Just another woman in a booth, just another customer having breakfast alone. But I wasn't invisible. I was awake. More awake than I'd felt in months. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the table, letting out a long, slow breath. My eyes flicked toward the window. Outside, the world was fully awake now. Cars passed steadily on the road. People walked their dogs. A mother pushed a stroller down the sidewalk, her phone pressed to her ear as she talked to someone on the other end. For a moment, I thought about going back to the house. Not to stay. Just to see it one last time. To take a final look at the life I'd built with Luke before I closed the door for good. But the idea left a sour taste in my mouth. What would be the point? I didn't need to see it to know it was over. I'd already seen everything I needed to see. I finished the pie slowly, savoring every last bite. When I was done, I pushed the plate away, my fingers resting on the edge. The fork lay in the center, tilted just slightly to the side. It felt symbolic somehow, like it was telling me that part's done now. Time to move on. I glanced at my reflection in the diner window. The sun was hitting the glass just right, and for a moment I could see myself clearly. My hair was still a mess, tangled from the night I'd had. My eyes were puffy, red-rimmed from crying. But my face looked different. Stronger somehow. Not pretty, not polished, but steady. Unshakable even. I tilted my head, studying myself the way you study a stranger on the train, wondering what their story is. And that's when it hit me. I wasn't the woman from last night anymore. That version of me had died the second I heard Luke's ringtone from the other side of that apartment door. This woman, the one looking back at me in the reflection, was someone new. I liked her better. The bell jingled again, and this time it was Emma. She walked in fast, her head on a swivel like she was scanning the place for me. Her auburn hair was pulled into a loose ponytail, her coat half-zipped, and she still had her car keys in her hand. When her eyes landed on me, her whole face softened. Relief mixed with something deeper, protectiveness maybe. "There you are," she said, walking straight to the booth. She slid in across from me, tossing her keys on the table with a clatter. Her eyes scanned me up and down, checking for damage like I just crawled out of a wreck. "God, you look like you've been through it." "Because I have," I said, my lips curling into the first real smile I'd felt in hours. Emma shook her head and leaned forward, resting her arms on the table. "You should have called me sooner," she said, her eyes narrowing like she was scolding me. "I would have driven to that house and dragged you out myself." "Yeah, I know," I said, letting out a short laugh. "But I needed to do it on my own." Her eyes softened at that. She nodded slowly, like she understood exactly what I meant. Emma had always been like that, fiery and protective, but smart enough to know when someone needed to fight their own battles. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her fingers warm against mine. "You okay?" she asked, her eyes locked on mine. "Not yet," I said honestly. "But I will be." "Damn right you will," she said with a grin. She pulled out her phone and started scrolling. "Okay, so here's what we're gonna do. I'm booking you a room at a hotel for a couple of nights. Nothing fancy, but it's clean, and you won't have to be alone in that house. We'll figure out the rest later."
I blinkte her, stunned.
"Emma, don't argue with me," she said, cutting me off with a look. "Not today. You're getting help whether you want it or not." I laughed again, a little louder this time. God, I needed that. "Fine," I said, raising my hands in surrender. "You win." "Of course I win," she said, tapping at her phone with a smirk. "I always do." We sat like that for a while, her scrolling through hotel listings, me watching her like she was the only solid thing in the room. I didn't realize until that moment just how much I needed her there. The weight of everything that had happened felt a little lighter with her sitting across from me. The waitress, Gloria, came back around. "Get you anything else?" she asked, glancing between the two of us. Emma raised a hand. "Yeah, can we get 2 coffees to go?" Gloria nodded, scribbling it down. "You got it, hon." When she left, Emma looked back at me, tilting her head like she was about to say something big. "You know you're not going back to him, right?" she said, her eyes sharp and serious. "I don't care if he begs. I don't care if he cries. You're not going back." I didn't even hesitate. "I'm not going back." "Good," she said firmly. "Because you deserve better than that. You always have." Her words hung in the air between us, heavy but comforting. I nodded slowly, letting them sink in. You deserve better. 3 simple words, but they hit harder than I expected. I'd spent so much time thinking that if I just worked harder, if I was more patient, more forgiving, more perfect, things would get better. But Emma was right. I deserved better than him. Better than that. Gloria came back with 2 paper cups of coffee, lids on, steam curling out of the little openings at the top. Emma handed her a 20, told her to keep the change, and slid one of the coffees toward me. "All right," Emma said, grabbing her keys. "Let's go." I picked up the coffee, feeling its warmth seep into my fingers. We walked to the door together, stepping out into the cool morning air. The sun was brighter now, warming the world in that soft, steady way it always does. Cars passed by. Birds chirped from the power lines. The world hadn't stopped for me. But that was okay. I wasn't stopping either. I had no plan. No house. No husband. But for the first time in a long time I wasn't afraid. I had myself. And that was enough. We drove in silence for a while, the low hum of the engine the only sound between us. Emma's car smelled like vanilla air freshener and spearmint gum, a scent I'd always found oddly comforting. She tapped her fingers lightly on the steering wheel, her eyes focused on the road, glancing at me every now and then like she was checking to make sure I hadn't fallen apart. But I wasn't falling apart. Not anymore. I stared out the window, watching the trees and buildings blur past. It felt surreal, like I was outside of myself, watching this scene play out from above. A woman sitting in a passenger seat, bags under her eyes, lips pressed into a thin line but not broken. Just quiet. It felt strange how calm I was now. I'd expected to still feel that sharp electric burn of anger, or maybe the crushing weight of sadness, but all I felt was stillness. Like my mind had finally stopped fighting itself. There was no more guessing, no more doubting. I knew the truth, and it was ugly, but it was solid. And somehow that was better than living with questions. Emma glanced at me again. "You want music?" she asked, already reaching for the radio dial. "Yeah," I said, my voice hoarse. She twisted the knob and a soft, steady rhythm filled the car. A guitar, slow and smooth, followed by a low, soulful voice singing about lost love and starting over. I almost laughed at how on the nose it was. It felt like the soundtrack to my life right now. I leaned my head against the window, letting the cool glass press against my temple, and closed my eyes. "You hungry?" Emma asked after a while. "Not really," I said, still staring out the window. "Too bad," she shot back. "You haven't eaten enough for someone who just burned her whole life to the ground." That made me smile just a little. "I had pie." "Pie isn't food," she said, flicking on her turn signal. "Pie is a reward for eating food. I'm getting you something real." I didn't argue. She pulled into a drive-thru, the neon signs buzzing faintly in the early morning sun. It wasn't crowded, just one car ahead of us waiting for their order. Emma tapped her thumb against the steering wheel as she scanned the menu board. "Bacon, egg, and cheese?" she asked, raising an eyebrow at me. "Yeah," I said, folding my arms across my chest. She ordered for both of us, adding hash browns and 2 large coffees, even though I still had the one from the diner. She handed the cashier a 20, didn't wait for the change, and pulled up to the next window. It all felt so normal, so everyday, like this wasn't one of the most important days of my life. Like I wasn't leaving behind everything I thought I knew. Once she had the bags, she passed one to me without a word. The smell of warm bread and crispy bacon filled the car, and suddenly I was hungry. I unwrapped the sandwich, my hands moving automatically, like I'd done it 1,000 times before. The first bite was too hot, burning the roof of my mouth, but I didn't care. I chewed slowly, savoring it. Food tasted different when you've been through something real. Necessary. Emma glanced at me as I ate, her lips twitching into a smile. "See," she said, taking a bite of her own sandwich. "Pie's not enough." Okay, I muttered through a mouthful of bread and egg. "You win." "Damn right I do," she said, her grin widening. We drove for another hour.
No rush, no urgency.
It felt like the world had slowed down just for us, letting us breathe for a little while. I didn't know where we were headed, and Emma didn't offer any details. She knew better than to overwhelm me with plans. Felt good not to have a plan. For once I didn't feel like I had to have every answer ready. When we finally pulled up to the hotel, it wasn't anything fancy. A 2-story building with tan stucco walls, the kind of place you'd stay for 1 or 2 nights on a road trip. The parking lot was half empty, and the sign out front flickered with the words vacancy. Emma parked close to the entrance and turned off the engine. "You sure about this?" she asked, tilting her head to look at me. "Yeah," I said, unbuckling my seatbelt. "I just need a place to think." "Good," she said, pulling out her phone. "I already booked it. Check-in's under your name. I paid for 2 nights, but if you need more, you call me." "Got it." I nodded, my throat tight. I didn't trust myself to speak. Emma reached over and squeezed my hand, her grip firm and warm. She didn't say anything, but she didn't have to. She knew. She'd always known what I needed before I did. We got out of the car, the sound of our doors shutting breaking the quiet. I pulled my suitcase out of the trunk, the wheels rattling softly against the pavement as I dragged it toward the entrance. The hotel lobby smelled like cleaning supplies and cheap air freshener, and the receptionist barely glanced at me as I checked in. "Room 204, the woman said, sliding the key card across the counter without even looking up from her computer. "Elevators to the right." "Thanks," I muttered, taking the card. Emma followed me to the elevator but didn't say much. She knew I was running on fumes, and she didn't push me to talk. When we got to my room, she stood by the door as I unlocked it, her eyes scanning me like she was making sure I was really okay. The room was clean but plain. Beige carpet, cream-colored walls, a bed with a floral-patterned comforter that looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 2000s. There was a little table by the window, a TV mounted to the wall, and a chair that looked like it had been sat in one too many times. It wasn't home, but it was enough. I set my suitcase down by the bed and sat on the edge, letting out a long breath. Emma stood by the door, her arms crossed, one eyebrow raised like she was waiting for me to say something. "You gonna be okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, nodding slowly. "I think I will." She watched me for a moment longer, then nodded back. "All right," she said, her eyes narrowing like she was daring me to lie to her. "Call me if you need anything. And I mean anything, Rachel. Don't do that, I don't want to be a burden crap. You call." "Okay," I said, trying to smile. "I promise." She took one last look around the room, then turned toward the door. "Love you, Rach," she said softly, glancing back over her shoulder. "Love you too, Em." She left, the door clicking shut behind her. I sat there for a while just staring at the door. Part of me expected it to swing back open, for Emma to pop her head in and tell me one last thing. But it didn't. It was quiet. Not the kind of quiet that feels heavy or sad. Just quiet. I stood up, walked to the window and pulled back the curtain. The view wasn't much. Just the parking lot and a few trees swaying in the wind. But I stood there for a long time watching the branches move, the leaves spinning in the breeze. "You're free now," I thought to myself. I didn't know where that thought came from, but once I had it I couldn't shake it. I was free. Not because I'd left Luke. Not because I was in some new place. But because I'd finally stopped blaming myself for everything that had gone wrong. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring. I didn't have a 5-year plan. But I had this room. I had Emma. And I had me. That was enough. For the first time in a long time I was enough. That night I lay on the stiff hotel bed, staring up at the ceiling. The hum of the air conditioner filled the room, a low, constant white noise that somehow made the silence more bearable. I wasn't thinking about Luke anymore. Not really. I wasn't replaying our fights or the lies he'd told, or the look on his face when I called him out. None of that mattered now. What mattered was me. I stretched out my legs, feeling the cool fabric of the blanket against my skin. My eyes traced the swirls of the textured ceiling, following the random patterns like constellations in the sky. For the first time in a long time my mind wasn't racing. It wasn't stuck on a loop of what did I do wrong? Or how could I have missed it? I'd already answered those questions, and the answers didn't matter anymore. I'd spent so much time trying to fix things that couldn't be fixed. Trying to save a marriage that wasn't mine to save. Loving a man who didn't deserve it. But tonight, lying in that quiet room with nothing but the hum of the air conditioner and the distant sound of cars on the highway, I felt something different. Peace. It wasn't loud. It wasn't sudden. It didn't feel like some grand revelation or a burst of inspiration. It was quiet, steady, like the way dawn comes after the longest night. Slowly, gently, but absolutely certain. I turned onto my side, pulling the blanket up to my chin. My eyes felt heavy, my body finally giving in to exhaustion. But for once I wasn't afraid to sleep. I didn't dread waking up. Tomorrow wasn't something to fear anymore. It was something to look forward to. Because for the first time in a long time I had nothing to prove. I didn't have to be perfect. I didn't have to fight for someone else's love. I didn't have to shrink myself to fit into the narrow space Luke had left for me. I didn't know where I'd go next, and for once that was okay. I didn't have to know. I just had to keep moving forward. I closed my eyes and breathed in slowly, letting the weight of it all fall away piece by piece. No more blame. No more regret. No more what ifs. I was free. And this time I wasn't going to waste it. The end.